Hello and good morning, everyone. Only Positivity here. I have my coffee with me, ready to kick off the 13th podcast on this playlist that I'm looking to launch called Elevated Thoughts. Before diving into the book and the story for today, just want to level set on what I'm doing here. So, as I endeavor upon pursuing knowledge and life experience in this next phase of life, through traveling, fitness, photography, and a few other things, one habit that I've really formed is reading. So this podcast essentially goes through some of the books I've been reading as of late and taking those lessons learned and applying them to experiences in my life. So, for today's story, I guess we'll go ahead and dive straight into it. Um, I think we'll talk about fashion for a little bit. So, I wouldn't consider myself like a very fashionable guy or anything like that, and I always seem to be late to the fashion trends. And one example of that is with fitted pants. So, these days everything is fitted, right? You're wearing fitted jackets, fitted suits, fitted pants specifically. Um, and so I was late to that trend, right? I was still wearing baggy pants up until a couple of years ago. And now I switched over to more fitted like khaki type pants from like H&M and whatnot. So, when I was younger in high school, and in middle school, and even in elementary school, I was a big fan of jean shorts. Okay, so, and obviously, like those went out of style. I don't know if they're like making a resurgence or whatnot, but those are out of style, or they have been for a long time. And I'm not talking about like fitted jeans or like those capri type jeans that guys wear. I'm talking about like baggy, like blue denim shorts in the traditional sense, right? So I think like anytime I've learned that I need to change my style, it's been through um, a hard lesson. Okay, so there was one time in college, and I was a freshman in college. So this was, I want to say like 2010, 2011. Okay. And jean shorts were definitely out of style by then. So, you know, me and the friends, me and the guys, we're generally very roasty when we see each other. So we're always gonna roast each other. So this kind of lays the land for the story here. But I actually wasn't with my core group of guy friends when this all happened. So I'm at a party essentially. Okay, so I'm at a party, and we're all freshmen. We're all like kind of nervous about parties, right? There's some drinking there. But like I was underage, so I wasn't really drinking as of yet. And it was just like it was an interesting time. I was trying to get to know people. We're breaking the ice. You're kind of wandering into uncharted territory, creating conversations with people you're unfamiliar with. So anyway, we are all in this circle. We're all just standing there. Me and a group of dudes. We're all just talking. Catching up on sports, whatever guys talk about, right? And um, so we're all getting comfortable with each other, and we start like kind of roasting each other a little bit, right? We're making fun of each other, we're poking at each other and stuff like that. Um, and uh, so a comment is made in the air, right? So it's like not in our direct circle of conversation, but someone in the distance goes, "Hey, nice jean shorts," and everyone starts laughing. Everyone in the party stopped and collectively started laughing together, and me included. I started laughing. I was like, "Ha ha ha ha, lol." And then I start looking around, and I'm like, nobody's wearing jean shorts. No guy's wearing jean shorts. Nobody's wearing jean shorts. And I look down, and I'm the only one wearing jean shorts, and they're all laughing at me, which is fine. Like I'm totally able to laugh at myself. Um, and it was an interesting experience. But like I said, generally when it's time for me to switch up my fashion, an experience like that will occur, and I'll say, okay, well I guess I need to revamp my whole wardrobe. So after that day, I stopped wearing jean shorts. Not I could still rock them, like I still have them, but it's just when you actually look at yourself, you look kind of wonky, right? Like everything looks a lot bigger on you back in the day, and now everything's a little bit more fitted. So I actually like modern day style, if that's what you can call it. But I did get roasted for wearing jean shorts about a decade ago, but I take those as learned experiences, and I improve going forward, I guess. So that's today's story, and then so we can redirect back to the book. So The book we're talking about here is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and we're going through part two on this podcast today. So, um, the book here is about Viktor Frankl's experience within a concentration camp during the Holocaust. So it goes through human psychology and how it relates to traumatic experiences. And what I really love about this book is that it shows no matter the scenario or the challenges that one faces in life, we as humans can really be resilient and rise above it. So, at the end of the last podcast, I talked about how Viktor Frankl he's really talking about his wife a lot, and how her love really pulled him through his time at the concentration camp. So, he mentions this, which is new for today, is that his wife was probably a few hundred yards away in the woman's part of camp, right? So that to me is really mind-boggling. Like me just imagining me and my fiance getting separated, but let alone her being like just right over there, but me not knowing if she's alive, if she's well, would drive me insane. But the idea of being reunited at some point in the future is enough for Viktor Frankl to stay alive during this trying time in the Holocaust. Um, so it just really attests to the fact that every single moment in a concentration camp was non-definitive. There was no clear outcome, and in today's world, we really need to know what's going to happen before we embark on something. And oftentimes, if we don't, it can cause this anxiety. But imagine the stress that Viktor Frankl was going through, where every day he could have died, every hour he could have died, not knowing when the end to this concentration camp was going to happen, the trauma that must have inflicted on himself or must have caused what is next level. But anyway, so we'll go on. So, Viktor Frankl goes forward and says, the prisoners of the concentration camp would still come together and attempt to enjoy things like storytelling or music, right? They would assemble a couple of huts, kind of conjoin them together, put some benches together, and then they would enjoy each other's company, for brief moments at a time, right? This didn't happen regularly, but they would enjoy each other's company for the little time that they had together. So he also talks about how humor was often used as a defense mechanism in the concentration camp. So he'll say that humor really allows a person to rise above a situation, even if it's just for a few moments. So, Viktor Frankl would joke with the people around him about minor things and try to really shed some light or some humor on the situation they were in. He would tell funny stories about, experiences before the camp, and what they were going to do after the camp as well. And, in a way that kept them going, right? Something to look forward to. But one thing I'll say is, I operate the same way, and my fiance and some of my friends will often say, hey, not everything's a joke. You shouldn't like laugh about everything, and that's right. Like there's probably many instances where I'm laughing where I shouldn't be, but I refuse to be super serious throughout life, and I think life should be taken very lightheartedly. But anyway, I'll use a story here. Okay, I'll use a personal story. So, a couple of years ago, a one of my good friends' father-in-laws passed away, unfortunately, right? And so we were all at the funeral to show support. And so me and my fiance show up, and I've gone through funerals. My whole life, I feel like I've been to an exuberant amount of funerals, and Indian funerals, the ones I primarily have gone to, are different in nature than an American funeral or your standard funeral or a wake, right? If we call. So anyway, so what's interesting about an Indian funeral is there is a lot of interaction with the body, which I think is very traumatizing for all parties involved, right? So let me paint you a picture, right? So there's an open casket in this funeral home that we're in, and it has like a very cathedral-like feel to it, very epic. So there's rows of people because my buddy's father-in-law was a very respected man in the community, so there's a lot of people there, and so his family's obviously in the front row right next to the body, and it's open casket, and they're all putting flowers, right? Everyone comes by and puts flowers in the casket, and they're doing prayers over the body. And so what's happening is every time one of the family members is going up to the body, they're seeing the dead body, and the body looks real dead, right? That's morbid, but the body looks so dead. Anytime someone goes up to the body, they go into this hysterical fit, like, oh my God, like beating their chest, right? Like it's very dramatic. And then they have this like outburst and they sit down, they calm down for 20, 30 minutes, get back up, go to the body. Oh my God. Like, it's like another fit, right? So every 20, 30 minutes, there's a huge fit going on. And I don't want to sound insensitive, but like, I just like looked over at my fiance and I couldn't help but laugh a little bit because I was like, you know, what what is going on here? Like, why would someone do this to themselves? And I'm being very controversial about this, but to me, the point of that was I was just like, this is crazy. Um, like everyone's going crazy, everyone's throwing their hands up in the air. It's like a Kanye West like sermon or something like that. And I just was like, I just thought it was funny, right? So anyway, kind of morbid, but like we should be able to laugh in these moments, right? Like death is a natural part of life, and being able to ingest things and just calmly rationalize them, calmly have a reaction to things, or in a lighthearted way, to me is really the only way to go about life. I don't like being sad or distraught for too long. But anyway, right? Going to show how shedding some humor on a situation now can really help you through a lot of things. Um, so anyway, moving on. So Viktor Frankl talks about finding the silver lining, quote unquote. He doesn't say that in the book, but that's the way I put it, right? Find the silver lining in any situation. So he talks about the train that initially took them to Auschwitz. Okay, so painting the picture. So in this train car, there wasn't even enough room for everyone to squat at once. So let's say that the town car could hold 60 people. There was probably like 200 people stuffed into this train car. Okay. So some people stood the entire way, stood for days, right? Not sleeping 3 nights. Um, Other people took turns squatting on this bale of hay that was in the corner of the car. And it was full of piss and shit, right? People would use it as their bathroom because they were on this car for three days and 3 nights. So the real how do I put the real fear set in because they thought they were going to this other concentration camp that was huge and they would for sure die there. And the signal that they were going to this camp was if they crossed this one bridge, right, on the train. So they realized that they didn't cross that bridge, right? They kind of went a different direction from that bridge, and they were so happy for a second, right? They were all screaming and shouting with joy, because they weren't going to that concentration camp. And so even when they got to Auschwitz, they found out that there was no oven, there was no crematorium or gas chamber, right? Because it was a camp with fewer prisoners. And this even made them happy as well, right? It was a sign that they might come out of this, right? They might survive this. So even in a time where there's negativity all around, there's always the ability to find silver lining in any situation. So we go off that note, okay? So the Nazi camp survivors or the prisoners would would thoroughly enjoy all of the little mercies they would receive, right? They were excited to have time to congregate before bed as opposed to just getting in their beds and having the capo shut the lights off, right? And there can't be any noise after that. I mean, this is not a relevant example, but think about the times that we were kids, right? And we were either joking around with our siblings late into the night, and my parents specifically would make us shut off everything, right? Shut everything down by 10 o'clock. We're in bed. And if they hear us talking or jibber jabbering, they're gonna come in and say, "Hey, no, be quiet. It's time to go to sleep," right? But those times where it was Friday or Saturday and we didn't have to go to sleep at 10, we were super excited, right? It was like, oh my God, we have this reward, we have all this time. Let's scheme, let's have fun, right? All those moments when you were kids, just staying up late was fun in itself, right? But going back to the concentration camp, they would be excited at those little mercies they would receive. Um, so there's going into another activity, right? Being resilient even in times of harshness or trauma. He mentions a story here where there's a person assigned to who had a ladle and he would fill up soup during mealtime, right? So the prisoners would come by with their bowls and he would fill up their soup. And so he said, in the of all the people who possessed or at one point had that job, there was only one person who would equally fill everyone's bowl. Okay? So there was a guy who would, to his friends, he would take the ladle all the way to the bottom of the soup bowl or the tub or the pot, and he would grab all the hearty ingredients and put it in his friend's bowl. But if someone came by that he didn't like, he would just graze some water off the top, which is more broth, and just put it in the bowl, right? But the thing to note here, and I think it's a very powerful quote. No man should judge unless he asks himself in absolute honesty whether in a similar situation he might not have done the same. Okay? So before we judge, before we jump to a conclusion, put yourself in that situation and imagine yourself there. And would you have done the same thing or would you have acted differently? Um, that's a very, very important exercise for us to do is to always put ourselves in someone else's shoes and see how they would react. And one example I'll use of this is so throughout this quarantine I've been watching this murder series on Netflix called I Am a Killer. Okay, so it really goes through inmates on death row and their stories as to how they got there. So it goes through their side of the story and then the state side of the story. So they do a good job of kind of making you feel conflicted, right? There's certain stories where you know the like let's use an example. So there's this one lady who she wasn't well off. She was poor, and so she always resorted to interesting ways to make ends meet. In one particular scenario, right? She had a gun and she had went back to a hotel room with a guy, um, and he had granted her a favor like earlier on, and so she had agreed to like go out to dinner with him. So he picked her up, but he said, hey, you know what? I need to go back to my place to take a shower before we can go out to eat. So he comes out of the shower like almost naked. This guy's like 6'5", 6'6", and he's approaching this girl saying, hey, you're gonna have to have intercourse with me or whatever if you want to leave here. Okay. So now, putting yourself in that person's shoes, right? You say, okay, I'm a female. There's a guy who's clearly going to overpower me here, and he's going to potentially rape me. Um, and I have a gun in my purse. Uh, I could use this and kill this guy in self-defense, or I could let this happen, maybe try to escape, maybe whatever. Maybe I'll shoot him in the leg or something like that. Okay. So this girl, ended up shooting the guy fatally. Right. He died from his wounds. Um, and then they go into the state side where they try to show or prove that she had some premeditated efforts to kill this guy. And so it's a we the gut instinct is to say, oh yeah, like she chose this life of criminality and blah blah blah, right? But you never know what you would do in that similar situation, right? I was fortunate enough to be brought up, in the first world. I never experienced poverty, so none of my decisions came from like a poverty type mindset. So for me to just blatantly or non-factually judge someone is unwarranted. So um, like I said, just putting yourself in someone else's shoes and seeing how you would react is a very solid exercise. Um, so going forward and talking about being resilient, coming back to the book. So Viktor Frankl himself would volunteer in the sick ward to take care of ill patients. And his thought process was, if I'm going to be here, I might as well help others and do something positive. Even in a concentration camp, this guy is attempting to save lives, right? And that's something very noteworthy, very commendable. But he goes forward and says, there's a second part of decision making, okay? So it wasn't just emotional, or maybe not even emotional at all, okay? And we should always try to remove emotions from our decision making. So he says that if he was part of a working party, like a part of a group that would go out, dig holes, and repair things, and be out in the field, right? Be part of a working party, he would probably die. Okay, so he said, "What use would I be if I, became a vegetable or caught pneumonia and died?" Right? So he made a calculated decision, saying, "Hey, look, um, in order for me to stay alive, which might seem contrary, I'm gonna have to go be with the sick patients." Okay, um, so that's a very very solid example in calculated decision making, even in traumatic times. But going forward to the prisoner himself. Um, Victor Frankl would say, they lived in a community, all these prisoners, they lived in a community where everything was constantly monitored, and they were almost herded like sheep, okay? And they would crave alone time because they would never have it. Um, they would, and I, they would find these prisoners often alone, right? Not often, but let's say they found a prisoner alone. They would label that prisoner as someone who's conspicuous, maybe scheming, maybe plotting, right? So you wouldn't want to be someone who stood out. You would always just want to be part of the herd. But they would live for these little moments when they got alone time. And like I said, all these examples are very extreme, but I kind of relate that to living at home. My parents are very in my business a lot. Um, they were just in my grill all the time, barging into my room, wanting us to be around them all the time, and then kind of becoming angry when we'd go out. So there was never like a very positive time. If you were in our room, it was negative because we were in our rooms. If we were with them, before long we would start fighting, and if we were out with our friends, we were not, being loyal to the family, whatever. But a lot of times, right? Like going to school, going to work, coming home, being with my family. I'm around people all day long. I just want to go in my room and relax, right? And like I slowly start realizing is like, I'm not a guy who likes to be around people all the time, right? I go out, I get my social interactions, and I come home, and I like being alone, right? And it gives me the time I need to reflect and unwind and recharge. But in my house, there's like no locked doors ever. It was tough. Um, but when when you're around people too much as well, it's hard to get a gauge of who you really are. When you're around, let's say, your parents all the time, you start to identify with their type of thinking. Or if you're around a certain group of friends, you start to identify with their type of thinking as well. And it all might be good, right? But it might not be you, right? And I realized that after I kind of pulled off from my parents' thought processes that I'm very different than them, and I have a different mentality than them, and it's okay. Um, it's okay to have different perspectives as long as we accept each other, and we promote positivity amongst each other. So, coming back to alone time, right? So we were talking about how Viktor Frankl volunteered in the sick ward. So when people died, there was just a pile of dead bodies. They would throw them in outside the sick ward, and then they would later burn them. Um, so Viktor Frankl would often go stand by a group of dead bodies behind the shelter, right, where the sick people were, and he would just look out on the landscape, and reminisce with this pile of dead bodies next to him. So he needed alone time so badly that he was willing to stand next to this disgusting, smelly group of corpses, just to get that time. So just think about the desperation of a Nazi camp prisoner there. And even a sick story, right? This is not super related, but he was looking at that pile of dead bodies once, and he noticed that there was like a large chunk of human flesh missing off of one of the dead bodies. And then he later found that exact piece of flesh boiling in a pot, and signifying that cannibalism had broken out in the camp, which is very, very, very detrimental, very sick, and it just kind of goes to show the extents that people had to go to survive in camp. So, talking about camp life going further, there was this level, he says there's a general level of irritability and tension in the camp. Okay? So, and this was partly attributed to the absence of nicotine or caffeine in the camp. There was no sign of that. So we talk about today, right? Present day. Everyone has some sort of vice, or not everyone. Most people have some sort of vice. Some people drink, smoke, they eat excessively, they shop, things like that. Um, and many people rely on coffee to really get their morning kick started, or get them to baseline in the morning. And myself included. But so I drink coffee every morning, okay, and I drink it mostly for the bowel movement, I guess, because it gets me going, gets me cleaned out. But um, at the same time, there is something nice about having a warm cup of coffee and just answering emails in the morning. There's something relaxing about having that time to yourself to get the day going. But even talking about, smoking weed and stuff like that, there's just nothing available to them there, right? Like like I said, I smoke weed, at a frequent cadence, and like I don't know, I wouldn't call it a vice or anything like that, but it's something I do, relatively often. So I'll throw that in that category as well. Um, You see people even today at work. So many people at my office take smoke breaks throughout the day, right? They need that. They can't even go a couple hours without that, that monkey just kind of on their back. But you know, there in the concentration camp, there wasn't even these baseline necessities, right? People wouldn't smoke their cigarettes because they used it as currency. And you'd be dumb for smoking your cigarettes. Um, but going back to being resilient, um, Viktor Frankl talks about how there were very few prisoners like this, but they did exist. And these prisoners would give up their piece of bread for someone who was sick, right? They only got one piece of bread every 4 days. So that means they probably weren't eating for a week. Um, there were prisoners who would walk through huts to check on people. Um, Really solid example here of how humans can overcome this apathy and their irritability, even though everything was taken from them, right? They chose to have a positive attitude. And, I talked about this before, but, a lot of people didn't die because of the circumstances in the camp. And I mean, they did as well, but the final outcome of the prisoner seemed, from Viktor Frankl's perspective, to be their decision, right? Someone who finally just said, you know what, I can't take it anymore. I give up. I'm ready to die. So someone take me, right? So either they gave up or they powered through it. So this really leads into the topic of suffering. So um, the first quote that Viktor Frankl mentions in this section is a quote by another psychologist that says, "The only thing that I dread is to not be worthy of my sufferings." So that goes back to our view on life. Um, I generally have a comfortable life, right? I I have a decent job. I have a good family life. I'm engaged to my best friend. I have a very solid group of friends. Um, awesome siblings. I don't experience a lot of poverty or too many issues throughout my day to day. Um, so but the other side of that is, how am I going to react when something necessarily doesn't go my way, right? Um, so I'll use another story. So one of my friends, like I was saying, one of my friend's father-in-laws passed away over the past couple of years, and um, look, what I'll say is, my boy definitely stepped up for the challenge, right? He was 100% the best man I've ever seen him be, right? He could have gotten down and he could have gotten down himself. He could have turned to a lot of things, right? Been like, I'm recently married. Why do I have to deal with this for 2 or 3 years? My father-in-law is, dealing with like a terminal illness, and my fiance's sad. There's a lot of depression going around. He only has X amount of time to live. Or he, what he did do was this, right? He said, "This is my time to step up. This is my time to be the rock. This is my time to not show weakness, to be someone that everyone cannot be right now, to be strong." And I kid you not, the speech that he gave at his father-in-law's funeral almost had me in tears, because this guy put it together, right? In a trying time, he maintained his cool, and he gave the best speech I've probably ever heard him give um, throughout our friendship. And I was so proud of him for that. And it was tough because at the same time, I wasn't talking to him for like 4 or 5 months at a time. And but when we would touch base, I would just know that, hey, my brother's grinding. He's getting it. He's doing what he's got to do for his family, and I support him in that. And even though it's tough for me not to see, like, one of my best friends throughout all this time, I supported him. I was always there. And like, I just wanted him to always know that it's times like these that define us as human beings, or define us as who we are. Right? Are we gonna push through it, or are we gonna cave? So interesting story there, right? Um, so not really trying to say why is this happening to me, right? Just saying this is gonna make me better. I'm worthy of my struggle. I'm worthy of my suffering, right? Suffering is a very essential part of life, I think. You really can't have the good without the bad, the yin or the yang. And I really think everyone needs some kind of monumental struggle to overcome in their life, because it does kind of have a way of peeling back a lot of layers of bullshit, and then you just realize what's important in life. And I think, having that struggle really, really helps us step up for the challenge. It shows us what we can do, right? Even talking about the day to day, like, my fiance really wants to run a half marathon, or I ran my first a half marathon. She wants to run a marathon. Ran my first half marathon 3 or 4 years ago, and I was like, man, you know what? I'm not really a big runner, but if I did this, I can certainly do more. I can certainly do this, right? If I, developed a plan, um, mile by mile, week by week to attain this, why can't I do that for another part of my life as well? So, not a dark time for me by any means, but um, just a way of applying that resilient methodology to other parts of life as well. So anyway, coming back to the book here, um, he says one of the biggest struggles for a prisoner was not knowing the end to their imprisonment. Okay, so not knowing how long the war would go on, not knowing how long it would be before they got freed. So the deeper effect of this is really that some people didn't have a goal to work towards because they were like, you know what, I'm just gonna hustle out this time in the concentration camp, and then I'll figure out my goal. I'll get back on it when I get out, right? But um, when you don't have a goal, you tend to decline, right? So he was saying that a lot of men would let themselves start declining, um, and they would start reflecting on life before the concentration camp, and that's how they would stay alive, right? They would just reflect on that past time. But what we talked about this with the Four Agreements, Power of Now, The Alchemist, right? Living in the past really poses some real risks because you rob the present of any opportunities to elevate. So a lot of the Nazi camp prisoners didn't realize that there was such a powerful opportunity to gain spiritual revival, right? In such a trying time, they could be resilient more than they ever were, even outside of the camp. Okay, um, and then let's talk about, even our jobs right now. A lot of times we say, okay, I'm gonna get this job for this amount of time and then move here. I'm gonna do this for X amount of time, move here. We find ourselves waiting for that next thing in life constantly. Okay, when I get there, I'll be happy. When I get there, I'll be happy. But then you rob the moment of any of those lessons that you could be learning right then, right? And you never get that time back. Um, but one contradiction I'll say in this book versus the other books I've been reading is that Viktor Frankl says that you should have a definitive future goal, and you should live through that future goal, and that can pull you through the present. Okay, and for a Nazi camp, that applies, right? You would have to almost think about life afterwards, so you could get through the moment. So Viktor Frankl starts talking about things. He starts worrying about getting more food in the camp, getting more clothes in the camp, um, getting on good terms with the capo, and he would get frustrated by this. He's like, none of this is important for me to think about. Like, this is idiotic. Okay, so what he did was he created a future image where he was giving a lecture in a university hall after the camp, and he was talking about his life in the concentration camp. So through that, he was really able to pull himself through his experience in the concentration camp, right? Through having that image. Okay. And, one question I'd love to ask you guys as we wrap up this podcast is, do you ever do that? So I do that all the time. I do it all the time in a lot of different areas, right? So, I sometimes picture myself podcasting with Joe Rogan, right? Like maybe one day I could podcast with Joe Rogan and just have a nice 2, 3 hour conversation with him, or talk to the weekend about how he developed his music, or his history with women and how he got to where he is today, and all those sad lyrics and what really motivated him to write music like that, or ASAP Rocky, Travis Scott, where do these guys get their musical inspiration from? And even, talking with my friends, I'd love to sit down and have conversations, deep conversations at a regular cadence with my best friends, right? That shows that we're always elevating, we're always increasing our knowledge base in life. And that really keeps me doing what I'm doing right now. Is maybe one day I can do that or not, right? Either way, I'll be good. Um, I picture me and the squad going on trips, right? Reflecting on trips for years to come, taking pictures, doing things like that, really talking about all the great things that we did in life and sharing in all of those together. So, anyway, I'll leave you with that thought. I hope you guys are enjoying the podcast. Feel free to leave me any feedback, always welcome. And remember, only positivity. Thanks, guys.